After graduating from university, I joined the Army. After the service, I got a job as a shift supervisor in a company where I had the good fortune to meet my future wife. A year later, we exchanged vows and began our married life together. Sarah is a humble and caring spouse. A year after we were married, we had our first child. At first, we lived in my mother-in-law's house and eventually built our own home adjacent to her house. For a little over 3 years, we lived amicably and harmoniously. Due to the impending birth of our second child, my wife had to leave her job and concentrate on the care of our children. In this regard, my mother-in-law became an employee of our company, replacing my wife. One summer, our company organized a special event to celebrate our boss's 50th birthday. The celebration was scheduled for Saturday in a country house located 40 kilometers outside the city, near a lake. Along the shores of this lake were many recreation centers. Many of these establishments had already closed, and the buildings were half empty. They were outdated, but our company managed to keep the recreation center for the employees of the company, but it was also living out its last years. On Saturday morning, the entire office gathered in a bus filled with refreshments and food, and we headed for the lake. Unfortunately, I got held up at work and wasn't able to join them until the afternoon. Arriving at the base, I parked the car under the awning and began my search for the director. I wanted to apologize for my absence at the beginning of the holiday and also to congratulate him on his anniversary. However, on the base, as it turned out, no one noticed my absence. The atmosphere was already filled with joy and laughter. Some were having a lively discussion, emphasizing the importance of our enterprise for the country, while others were happily swimming or boating on the lake. No one seemed to know the whereabouts of the director, not even his wife, who was sunning herself apart from the rest of the office crowd, sitting in the sun in a boat by the reeds. After searching almost every house, I finally entered one of the largest buildings, which appeared to be the base office. Walking down a long corridor with numerous doors, I called out to Victor, our director, but there was only silence in response. Walking further down the hallway, I entered an open door and found myself in a cluttered room with tables and furniture piled with various items. Then I noticed a slightly ajar door, from which came unfamiliar sounds, more like quiet moans. Curiosity took over, and I walked to the door and was stunned by what I saw. My mother-in-law and the chief were lovers. She was acting like a 20-year-old girl in the arms of the chief and doing things that are embarrassing to say. What a turn of events. And to their rescue were the old mattresses that were lying there. To be honest, my mother-in-law, whose name was Deborah, was a very charming woman. And to say I was surprised by what I saw, no, I wasn't. It was just unexpected. And my father-in-law, who liked to drink apparently, was no longer very good in bed and could not meet the needs of her body. So my mother-in-law decided to replace her husband, our general director. I left the room and went to the lake. We had a nice celebration and drove home. At home, I asked my wife if she knew about my mother-in-law's relationship with my principal, and she replied that her mother had told her about it, but asked her to keep it a secret. After all, with his father they had long ago not worked out, and she is a woman of prominence. Yes, I thought, as long as my wife did not become like her mother, or everything is wrong, and who knows how I could behave in such a situation. For months after I found out about my mother-in-law, Deborah's affair with my boss Victor, tensions simmered in our family. My wife Sarah was still digesting her mother's secret relationship, and I was still worried about what might happen if word of it got out at our firm. My mother-in-law kept having secret meetings with my boss, even on his desk. I almost caught them in an interesting pose. Then I thought, it's not my mother-in-law, it's just an insatiable shark of love and affection. A few days later, my wife and I find out that she's divorcing her husband and the boss is divorcing his wife, and they have plans to be together. Shortly after the divorce, Deborah and Victor were married in a small ceremony. Although my father-in-law was heartbroken at first, he eventually came to terms with the situation and moved on with his life. As for Sarah, She accepted that her mother had gone her own way, although their relationship remained strained for a while. As a way of healing, I suggested a family meeting, with Deborah and Victor in attendance. Sarah reluctantly agreed. The reunion was understandably awkward at first, but after wine and reminiscing, the tension subsided. I noticed Sarah and Deborah talking quietly and then hugging. At one point, there was even laughter at the table. Later, Sarah admitted that she had managed to calm down a bit. "I'll never be able to fully understand her choices," she reflected. "But Mom seems happier than when she was with Dad. She and Victor clearly have a fulfilling connection. I need to accept that, despite the way things have turned out." I was relieved to see Sarah finding peace and our close-knit family adjusting to the new phase of life. Time has a way of dulling sharp edges, making room for a new reality. We still attend shared holiday events with Deborah, Victor, and my father-in-law. There's an unspoken backstory to it, but focusing on the present serves us all well. Of course, my boss and I had to set some boundaries when it came to discussing his personal life. But in the end, our families merged with surprising harmony, given the turbulent environment of the early days. How naive was I, living in the city and working with prejudices about rural people? How many passions lurked in these people? How many secret feelings and unrealized goals were hidden behind the mask of endless work in the field, in the vegetable garden, or even at home in the household? Last year, I successfully got married. I had a long time to choose among the many applicants for my heart and father's money, and finally settled on a simple country woman named Rebecca. She was from a rural town about 200 kilometers from the metropolis. I married late, at the age of 38, having spent most of my conscious life in a haze of nightclubs and drunken stupefaction. I would have drifted further downstream had it not been for my father, who imposed severe restrictions on me and ordered me to settle down and get married or risk being weaned off Dad's money, which was not part of my far-reaching plans for a meaningless existence. The girl who arrived, to the delight of me and my parents, was quiet, modest, and sweet. My wife was only 20 years old. I was almost twice her age, and our relationship was full of passion. I met her by chance at a bar where she was alone, propping up the wall of the restroom. Her grandeur captivated me from the start. On closer inspection, she appeared charming and straightforward on the outside, yet resolutely chaste on the inside. No woman at arm's length, noticing someone's careless glance in her path, was ready to tear anyone to shreds. My Rebecca, who had a fine figure by local standards, could not shake off her provincial mentality and was terrified of my tipsy buddies and their snake-like acquaintances. That's when we got married. I was attracted to her. I needed a change of scenery, and my brain finally came up with a life-saving solution: to go to her parents in the village. I had heard about her mother and what a heavy alcoholic her father was. My wife, taking my proposal as an act of benevolence and love for her parents, took pity on me and almost strangled me in her arms. After stuffing the car to the brim with gifts for relatives, we continued our trip to my wife's native village. Her parents had been our guests once in town, and they had been at the wedding. Her mother was a simple little woman with slanted eyes, a little older than me. She was only 40 years old the first day we met. My mother-in-law and I had a little embarrassment. We were sitting at the table, drinking and asking a lot of questions to each other. My wife's father was the first to get drunk, and the three of us stayed at the table. Soon Rebecca got tired and went to bed, and my father-in-law went to bed too. So I was alone with my mother-in-law. I addressed her as you, since we were almost the same age, and everything seemed to be normal. We were having a great time, and then my mother-in-law started to clear the table. I, of course, offered to help, and in an instant, carrying plates, we met in a narrow aisle. That's when the flame between us burst into flames. This moment struck me hard, and the intoxicating vapors of alcohol intensified the effect. I could not stand it and threw myself into her arms. My mother-in-law immediately understood everything, and, without saying anything, took me outside to the barn. That's how ordinary and unexpectedly everything turned out for us. In the morning, I woke up next to my wife, as it was supposed to be. Although I had a headache, I smiled, realizing that our stay in the village would be unforgettable. For the next few days, I awkwardly avoided being alone with my mother-in-law for fear of losing my self-control again. I knew I had to come clean if I was to have any chance of furthering my marriage. One night, as Rebecca and I lay in bed, I confessed everything confusingly between choking sobs. She was completely confused, burst into tears, and recoiled from my touch. I spent the night on the couch, writhing in the agony of having hurt her so deeply. In the morning light, we talked more calmly. Although Rebecca was still outraged, she said she appreciated my honesty. Perhaps with the help of a counselor, we could rebuild the broken trust. When her mother dropped by later, I apologized to her as well. I should not have so abused her hospitality and affection. Emma seemed relieved and promised to respect the boundaries of what was permissible from now on. After that, Emma began to keep a polite but safe distance from Rebecca and me. With time and effort, our marriage was largely restored. Rebecca will never forget, but she found the strength to forgive. Her amazing resilience through it all taught me to recognize mistakes in order to clear the air, no matter how painful. Now our commitment has become more conscious and deliberate. This scar has made us truly cherish our love, but the incident that happened in the narrow passage, I will certainly remember for life, no matter how I justify myself to my young wife, afraid of losing her. But my mother-in-law's experience makes me realize it. So we live like this. We'll see what happens next.